Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Monday, April 13th, 2026. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. We have a full house today with executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Social commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
Washington Free Beacon editor Eliana Johnson. Hi, Eliana.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And joining us today, contributing editor, host of the Breaking History podcast, columnist at the Free Press, Eli Lake. Hi, Eli.
Hi, John.
Okay. Ceasefire, negotiations, Pakistan, 21 hours. J.D. Vance comes out, says the Iranians have nothing to say to us. We'll concede on nothing. We'll move on nothing. Donald Trump announces a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, which sounds counterintuitive, but we're going to get to why it is exactly not counterintuitive. And here we are Monday morning. Trump, always unexpected, gets into a fight with the Pope last night. Eric Swalwell is out of the governor's race in California after 48 hours of bad publicity. One of the more hilarious things to happen before we get off Eric Swalwell forever was a statement by the Swalwell senior staff in Congress saying, we all agree that he is a monster and we're all sickened and disgusted by him. But some of us have mortgages and so we can't quit right away. And the senior staff here at Swalwell Inc. is going to protect the junior staffers who need to find other jobs. So we're not going to quit right now. One of the more demented statements ever to emerge.
John,
in American
I think
politics.
it was. Oh, wait, I just violated your request.
No, please.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. Yeah.
It was something like, our continuing to work on the campaign should not be taken as a statement of support for the candidate.
Not just the campaign, but his congressional office. So not only are you still working for the campaign that you have now disavowed, but you can't work for a congressman whom you condemn. We have achieved a level of illogic that I understand that Gen Z has new ideas about how workplaces are supposed to revolve around them, but this took this to an entirely new level. I'm not defending Eric Swalwell. I just thought, like, as a weird moment in American history, this was one of them. Anyway, we should move off this and get to the more important matters, like the war. Eli, we were all nervous that something untoward was happening last week, that Trump was looking for an off-ramp or was going to end this war or whatever we have here in some kind of state of complete indeterminacy, and that he had empowered the person in his administration most associated with not wanting this war to happen in the first place. And I don't think that's where we are here on Monday morning.
No, we are not there. I think you summed it up really well, as I wrote in my column on it. Iran's, the line on Iran is that they've never won a war and they've never lost a negotiation. Well, they ran into J.D. Vance, who I think was there loyally representing the Trump position. And it comes down to this idea that Iran has a right to enrich uranium. That is an absurdity, but we should understand what a huge concession that was even before the Obama administration and John Kerry finally got what's known as the JCPOA, not a treaty, kind of an agreement, like very difficult to parse exactly what it was. But before that, just to get to the negotiations that led to the JCPOA, John Kerry, who was then Secretary of State, said that the United States recognized Iran's right to enrich uranium, which means that that is the predicate for allowing the Iranians to keep their industrial enrichment program if they promise to enrich at certain levels and never use it to make weapons-grade fuel. That has been Trump's red line. It was one of the main reasons that he withdrew from that agreement in 2018. There is now a kind of narrative spin that former Counterterrorism Center Director Joe Kent is pushing, and Trita Parsi and others are echoing, which says that no enrichment is the Israeli red line, but the real American red line should allow for enrichment because the Iranians would never accept no enrichment. And that's kind of the point. But obviously that's Trump's red line. And the point is that in some ways it matters a lot less because all of their enrichment plants are inoperative, according to Netanyahu, what he said over the weekend in a speech about the war. And I think that's right. We've rebelized a lot of it. But that's the point. And the fact that the Iranians, given the state of their largely destroyed nuclear program, are still insisting on the right to enrichment, which no other country, by the way, there's lots of countries that have nuclear programs, and the deal is that they're not allowed to enrich the uranium in the country, and they get the benefit of nuclear power without the ability to make a nuclear weapon. That was the standard U.S. policy. It was kind of the standard world policy for the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty. So this exemption that we carved out for Iran is being revoked, and in many ways has been revoked. If that's the main sticking point, then I don't know where we're going to go, because I don't know why the Iranians would even insist at this point. They're like almost, over time, it's going to cost them hundreds of billions, if not $1 trillion, to try to get to where they were.
Okay, so that's the enrichment aspect. The ceasefire, according to Trump last Tuesday, was reached for the purposes of opening the Strait of Hormuz. And of course, Iran then kept the Strait of Hormuz closed. So now I think we need to explain what it means and why, if we want the Strait of Hormuz open, Trump is now blockading the Strait of Hormuz. I encourage people, by the way, you've been reading about it for weeks. You may not have actually looked at a map. It is worth just Googling Strait of Hormuz and clicking on the map to understand what the Strait of Hormuz is. It is kind of
who has studied the maps? Kamala has studied the maps.
Kamala loves maps, and I'm sure her reading of the maps is as accurate as her reading of the maps in Rafah. But you just want to look at a map. So it's essentially a kind of choke point. It leads to it's shaped like an arrowhead. It leads to a point. On one side are the Gulf states, Oman, and so the other side is Iran, and closing the strait, which is I think 13 miles wide at its widest point, or something like that. All that means is that because Iran sits on one side, it can shoot at boats, which need to go into the strait to go to a refinery to load oil that then needs to come back out of the refinery into the open Indian Ocean and then sail on. But that's also how Iran gets its oil out. Iran gets its oil out through the Strait of Hormuz. So when Iran said we're blockading the Strait of Hormuz, or they didn't quite say it that way, but they said we're closing it, there's a little bit of a suggestion, if you follow this, if the strait is really closed, and this is what Trump is now daring, of Bart in Blazing Saddles putting the gun to his own head and saying one move and the end gets it. Because Iran depends on the Strait of Hormuz being open as much, if not more, as everybody else depends on the Strait of Hormuz being open. Therefore, if the United States announces it is blockading the Strait of Hormuz, it is now saying, okay, Bart, shoot yourself in the head. Okay.
Well, can I
wait,
John,
Eli, let Abe go, and then you go. Abe.
Okay.
Well, my understanding is that we're just blockading ships going to and from Iranian ports.
Right, but that's the same thing. In other words, if Iran says we're blockading anybody that we're not getting paid off by, We're saying we're blockading Iran. They're
Right,
the
but we're
ones who
letting-
brought up. Okay,
But we're letting there's as you said there's other Gulf ports
well,
that
there
we're
are two
allowing.
passages,
Yeah,
right? There's the sort of Omani passage and there's the Iranian passage. I'm just saying that Iran, by saying it was going to close the Strait of Hormuz, exposed. Okay, Eli, you want to talk, so you go. Sorry.
I think the cinematic reference is A Bronx Tale, the great Chaz Palmeri film, in which there's a scene in which
Palminteri,
these.
but yes,
Oh, my bad.
not Tara Palmeri, Chaz
right.
Palminteri. Okay,
Self Palminteri, where this is about a kind of local mafia boss and everything. But a gang of bikers comes in and goes to one of their kind of local bars, and there's they're acting hostile and so forth, and you know, Chaz comes in, he's playing Sonny, the mafia guy, and he says, "Is there a problem?" And they say, "No, we just wanted a couple beers." Okay, spoken like a gentleman. And then they spray the poor bartender, and then he locks the door and he says, "Now yous can't leave." And all of the other mafiosos come in through the basement entrance and beat the crap out of them. That is sort of what Trump is doing. He's like, "Okay, you think you're the madman? No, I'm the madman. I'm gonna shut the whole thing down, and now you're not gonna get any revenue." And try explaining that to China. Because I think he knows something that hasn't been made public. This is what I suspect. I haven't reported it out yet, but what I think happened was when he threatened to bomb the power plants, I don't think it moved the Iranian regime, the five
When
people
Trump
in charge,
threatened.
right?
Yeah.
Right. I think it freaked out China. And I think China told Iran they've got to agree to something and start talking this out and de-escalating. And I think that this is also aimed directly at China. Like, China has so much more to lose by having the strait closed more and and Iran has a lot to lose. So basically, Trump's like, if my allies can't get their oil to market, then you can't get yours to market. And that means you, China. And that right there, I think, is creating a lot of leverage. Add to that the CENTCOM has announced a mission to try to clear whatever mines are in the strait at this point. And I think that he has turned this one piece of leverage from Iran into a piece of leverage for the United States, and Iranians, they got nothing.
So let's talk about what happened that led us to this point where we have now pulled this arrow out of our quiver that we didn't want to use. Ordinarily, or in the course of human history, one of the ways wars start without shooting is a blockade. In other words, we would have blockaded the Strait of Hormuz to begin with, or the Iranian access to the Strait of Hormuz, as the opening gambit in a war, not something that happens 2 months later. That's the classic war, is that you try to choke people off economically and then you start firing. Here, we weren't doing that because I think there was an unrealistic hope that this war could be fought and that the oil shock could be, absorbed in some fashion by letting there be free flow of oil, including Iranian oil. Oil would flow, we'd bomb them, but we would try to mitigate whatever horror the markets might feel by making sure that there was no interruption. Now we're 6-7 weeks into this war. Trump needs to win the war. And we're now doing what probably in some classic Clausewitzian sense should have been done first, which is cut the Iranians off economically when they're broke. Cut them off entirely from the thing that makes them important to China when they're broke. But this inventive effort to fight a war with an oil state while allowing it to remain a player in the oil market clearly made it easier for them to absorb the blows of the war. And now he's going at that. How does Eliana, does that sort of conform with your sense of what's happening? You're on mute. You're on mute. Okay, there we go.
Sorry.
That's
It
okay.
does. I just wanted to add. So the strait is, you're right. It's very informative to look at a map. It's 21 miles wide at the narrowest point. It's a little bit wider, but the actual shipping lanes are just 2 miles wide. And the thing we haven't mentioned, but it's sort of obvious, is that about half of Iran's or the regime's revenue comes from oil and gas. And this is aiming to cut that off, entirely cut off the revenue that they derive from their oil exports, and to demonstrate to the world that they cannot hold the strait hostage. This is also, by the way, what we did in Venezuela. And I think there's an effort to demonstrate that we can do the same thing in the strait, moving this, from a military operation, and this is using the military, obviously, but to an economic operation. And I think it's important to remember that what drove the protests in January was the economic crisis in the regime. And I've wondered in the back of my head whether this operation to cut off the oil revenues is not intended to drive people out in the streets, which, the president had said people are not likely to come out and protest when bombs are flying. So now bombs aren't flying, but we're going to twist the screws economically.
Seth, Bibi Netanyahu gave a speech on Saturday night, I think. I think it was Motzei Shabbat in Israel. And it was a very interesting speech because he kind of echoed Trump in saying, like, our campaign has concluded. I don't sort of like the Passover Seder is concluded according to the rituals of our forefathers. I wasn't quite clear what he meant by that. I think what he was referring to was the fact that, as Trump keeps saying, all of the major targets that we know about that they know about have been hit. And he explicitly said, as Eli mentioned, that they have no surviving enrichment capacity. He said there were, didn't he say 6 sites? Something like that, and they're all gone. So they are no longer able to do this, and maybe they'll be able to fire missiles. Maybe they'll be able to do this. But we've achieved a lot, Israel said. And that means that we are in phase 2 of the war. If Israel's saying, I don't know what more we're going to hit, and Trump said, we're running out of targets. In a weird way, opening the Strait of Hormuz means we're supplying the Iranians with a potential target, maybe drawing fire that will then lead us to, like, find a new target of opportunity, like where they're firing the drones from, or whatever.
I don't. Yeah. My sense is I don't think that Bibi believes that they've run out of targets, and I think that the best way to understand this particular speech, press conference, whatever you want to call it, is imagine it were not Bibi giving that roundup, that summation of the war. What would Bibi say? And I think that Bibi would sound much like his opposition, which is that he would say that it was, unfulfilled potential in the war itself. So I don't think that Bibi thinks they've run out of targets. I think that he is deferring to Trump, obviously. One country is the superpower here. And he also knows that Israel is getting hit from all sides now in America by the idea that this was Israel's fault and Israel's war. And, Bibi always wanted this, but he couldn't find somebody to do it until he found Trump or something like that. And so I think Bibi is playing very cautiously in how he expresses his opposition to the idea that the war has concluded and there's nothing left to do. So I think he's trying to be diplomatic, but I don't think that he's satisfied. And I don't think that his speech came across as a guy who feels triumphant. So, the main danger to him is the election coming up, and the idea that if Iran is left in too similar a position after this big co-war that's been, waiting in the wings for 30 years, then, I guess Bibi's lost it and it's time for someone else or whatever is what the opposition would say. He has to find a way to counter that without crossing Trump, without saying Trump is wrong or Trump is foolish for stopping this now.
Okay, but he did talk about Lebanon. So Israel's fighting on two fronts, right? It's fighting in Iran, and its effort is now to defang or basically do what it can to obliterate Hezbollah in Lebanon. And he said, for the first really explicit moment, that in 6 hours they had destroyed Hezbollah's half of Hezbollah's offensive capacity in 6 hours. We had heard that they had run an incredibly significant operation, I think, on Wednesday, but we were not given the details. Defense Minister Katz was kind of like crowing and strutting around very proudly, but they wouldn't reveal the details. Something happened, an operation happened where simultaneous Hezbollah command and control locations were hit sort of in a beeper way. They were all hit at once at the same time, and apparently this was very significant. So if there's two fronts and they have to fight against Hezbollah, which they still have to do, and Hezbollah is still raining rockets down on Israel as we speak, on the north in particular, they've been given a bit of a breather by the ceasefire to do that, and they're at the ready if there's a shooting war to be had with Iran or to resume with Iran. They're at the ready, having had a week's break.
That's
Eli,
why I say this is for, just real quick, that's why I say this was for public consumption and for the campaign.
Right.
Because, they did do something last week, and he might be right about everything that they accomplished, but because it's not public and it's not flashy, and people didn't, it's not bombing Nasrallah in his bunker while Bibi is giving a speech at the UN in Turtle Bay, right? It's not something that everybody knows happened or understands the extent of. And so he's left trying to convince people, the public may come away from this saying, it doesn't look that different. And Bibi's just trying to say, I promise you it's different.
Eli, can we do a little press bashing?
In a second. Can I just really quickly, really quick on Lebanon?
Yeah.
I think the sort of intense bombing on Wednesday, the announcement that we've hit a lot of things, there are going to be people who are going to spin that as a walk down. Not at all. Because what did Israel get? It got face-to-face negotiations with the elected government of Lebanon to effectively negotiate the demise of Hezbollah. So if you can get a kind of, a veneer, a cover of the Lebanese government announcing that they're going to be like the main people leading the operations with Israeli support because they don't have the capability at this point to take out Hezbollah, that's a political sea change. It discredits the argument that Israel's haters in the region and America are making, that it's somehow what Israel's doing is ethnic cleansing or another genocide, whatever they're going to say, and they'll still say it. But the reality is that Israel is supporting a Lebanese government operation to take out what is effectively a fifth column in their government that had undermined its sovereignty for 20 years. Iran is not part of those negotiations. They explicitly said, we don't want Iran determining the fate of Lebanon. Wow, that's huge. They'd already kicked out the Iranian ambassador. So my view is that even though this looks like a walk back, it's actually a win, even though everybody knows that if it was just left to the Lebanese government and the Lebanese army, they don't have the capability to take on even the remnants of Hezbollah. Maybe they do. I don't know. They're pretty diminished at this point. But if they can do that with Israeli assistance, that's huge for Israel. That is the message that Israel needed to send after October 7th was, don't mess with us, we'll destroy you. Now the message has to be, we're a responsible regional actor. You can trust us to be the hegemon of the Middle East. This is a great step towards that. And I think that we should understand that this is actually a brilliant piece of statecraft from Bibi, and not necessarily, him kind of, losing a round or something like that, or the way it was originally spun.
Okay, so actually, Christine, as our former media commentary columnist in your previous role as media commentary columnist, I want to read something, a piece from the New York Times this morning, because it gets to this point, which is, what is it that Israel is feeling, and where Israel stands on this war? Because reading the American press about American Jewish public opinion shifting, as is American opinion, shifting against Israel, or being unsympathetic to Israel, or thinking that things aren't going right with Israel. David Halbfinger has published a news analysis in the New York Times this morning, reporting from Jerusalem. And here is what he says. The 40-day war with Iran and the ongoing war with Hezbollah have left many despairing over how little they believe the fighting accomplished, particularly compared to what they had been promised, according to 2 new polls. Okay? So, meaning, the Israelis think it stinks. And this, I think, is what Seth is responding to in saying that Bibi needed to come out and try to put a good face on what was going on. Okay? So here is what the 2 polls, as he himself, Halfinger, say about Israel. And this is why the piece seems to want to echo that, just like in America, Israel thinks it's losing the war and it stinks and everybody hates Netanyahu and all of that. So one poll says barely a third of Israelis believe that when Israel and the United States disagree, Israel can act on its own judgment. Okay? According to an opinion poll released Sunday by the INSS in Tel Aviv. Since Israel's also 90% of Israelis like and trust Trump, I'm not sure that this supposedly represents something. If Israel and the United States can't disagree, but what the United States is doing is something with which most Israelis agree, that wouldn't seem to be a great negative. It's number one. Number two is this. A separate poll by the Agam Institute and the Hebrew University found that 3 times as many Israelis see the war as a failure than a victory. Some 70% believe the ceasefire reflects an American concession to Iran, and 2/3 oppose it. Why am I bringing this up? Because note that they think it's a failure because they don't like the ceasefire. And they think the ceasefire is an indication not that the war is a failure because it hasn't achieved its aims, but because they're worried that America was about to bug out and that the ceasefire was bad, not that the war was bad. And this piece is released Monday morning after the ceasefire had fallen apart, and therefore the data in the poll are completely outdated because they reflect a prior reality, which is that the ceasefire was in place, and Trump essentially, by saying we're closing the strait or closing the Iranian strait this morning, ended the ceasefire. So the New York Times wants Americans and its readers to believe that Israelis are pessimistic about what's gone on here, which, from everything that I've been able to glean, is simply not true. And that what Seth was saying is that the Israelis are worried that the job isn't going to be finished. And Eli is saying Israelis are worrying too much. Israel is maybe finishing the job in an incredibly innovative and epic-changing way. Where do you stand on this New York Times story? Not that I've given you much room.
I didn't read the New York Times story. I'm sorry.
Well, by the way, it's very short. It's literally 6 paragraphs long, so I read you half of it. So just so you know.
Well, I do.
No one would. You can just. You're supposed to just pretend you read it. I mean, no one would call you on it otherwise.
Well,
What kind of pundit, admits to not having?
That's committing auto pundicide, Seth. I refuse to do that. No, two things jump out at me about that story, because I was struck over the weekend, and there was a very grudging line or two in a New York Times editorial about the war, which said, Americans shouldn't really be wishing for Iran to win this either. And it was a sort of dead giveaway of exactly the tone of the coverage of this war that we've talked about a lot. And then I think from what you've said about that piece reflects it as well. The fact that they're trying to export the same viewpoint to Israel is funny, considering, as you say, the notable support for the Trump administration and for this conflict. I am, though, interested in that question of how do we define victory and how does Israel define victory? Are those going to look the same? I was heartened even though the 24-hour negotiation-a-thon collapsed in Pakistan, that Vance came out and said our red line is the nuclear material. They cannot have that. I was glad to see that emphasized over and over again after these negotiations fell. I think I'm a little skeptical about whether long-term the strategy of the blockade will work, just because as a temporary measure, I think it's great. But, the IRGC still has a lot of these small boats that they can use to attack and harass ships. Will we have the ability and the courage to sustain this blockade when our ships start getting hit, or if we hit a mine and there are any casualties? So I think my question for the administration is the goal to get Iran back to the negotiating table? Is that the goal of this? Because what we saw in Pakistan pretty clearly is that for Iran, victory is just continuing to survive. Victory for us is going to look different. We have very legitimate demands. So that's where I see this blockade being maybe a near-term effective tool, but we will have to back it up most likely with a return to some sort of targeted campaign. Maybe we do have to hit Karg Island. I think the blockade is only going to be a temporary solution for now. That's at least where I see things as of the end of the weekend.
That's a very rational way of looking at this. Obviously, we can't just, and I mean rational in the sense that obviously Trump has now put his money where his mouth is. He's saying the strait is closed to Iran. We're going to try to keep it open. And Iran is saying, you're not going to close the strait. We're going to fire on you. I mean, like I say, okay. So we have 15 ships
The
in the
Navy
air.
ships have guns, too.
Yeah. The Navy ships have guns. The oil tankers don't have guns. The Navy ships have guns. And as Eliana points out, the area that we're talking about at its narrowest point is 2 miles. And we also have these boats that we have had since World War II called minesweepers. And I looked it up. And minesweepers both in the Pacific and North Atlantic theaters in World War II cleared, captured, disabled, whatever, something like 6,000 mines between the Japanese and the Nazis. This is a very old technology dealing with laying mines and clearing mines. This is not, this is not 21st century dronage. This is very old, and we actually know how to clear mines. Trump says the Iranians don't even know where the mines are because they've lost their mine. He used a term, their mine getting capacity or their mine ship hunting capacity or something. They dropped
John,
them.
a mine is a terrible thing to waste.
You're just sitting there trying to think of one-liners. It's good. It's good. It's really. But anyway, they don't know. Trump said the Iranians don't know where the mines are, but we do, and we can find them and we can clear them if, in fact, we can. And we can clear the mines, which is a very delicate process. Don't get me wrong. And by the way, if you want to know what a minesweeper is, go watch the Kane Mutiny. The USS Kane is a minesweeper. Probably the best known novel about World War II, movie about World War II fighting in the Pacific. It's a complicated thing to do, to sweep mines, but we know how to do it. We've known how to do it for 8 decades. And so we can do it. So that's one thing that we can take off their strategic map, which is they've laid mines. Trump said there's 30 mines, we can get them. Then there's the question of drones. Right?
There are, by the way, but there are small, they're not mines, but small boats can come up to the hull of a big ship and attach an explosive to it. So there's that. The small ships also have to be fired on.
But, so if we're going to keep it open, we're obviously going to do this thing that we said we weren't going to do, which is escorting or being around or tracking these ships the way you can track ships. I mean, it's not like there are going to be 5,000 ships a day suddenly that you can have a boat, like climb up to. I mean, we obviously have eyes on the place. This mission, if the United States isn't capable of keeping this waterway open by closing it, or we're closing it by opening it. I mean, that's part of the conundrum here, is that what they want to do is come up aside our ships that are closing it and bedevil us. And that I think we can handle. Eli?
I also
Wait,
I think, but no, I just want to say, I just think, Christina, I appreciate what you're saying, but if you add two things, the sophistication of the American Navy plus our extraordinary ISR capabilities, I think that, America and Israel win against the equivalent of like the IRGC's like Miami Vice villains, which are like on speedboats and, I'm just saying, yes, I get it. It's a threat. We don't want to have boots on the ground on the shore, and I think eventually someone is going to have to do that. But this is not an insurmountable military challenge, given what I understand, especially the intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance capabilities of the United States are in 2026. I think we're going to be able to sort of see these little things as they crop up and probably take them out. I'm not saying that it's not going to get dicey at a certain point, but
no, I agree, and I think that's correct. I guess my larger question is, what does the diplomatic victory look like for us with regard to the nuclear materials, with regard to sort of long-term control of the strait? I totally agree with you on our strategic.
On the nuclear materials, my understanding, I mean, like, listen, we have to acknowledge that there's some unknown here. There's something called Pickaxe Mountain. Apparently it's not online. And there is this, 900 to 1,000 pounds of highly enriched uranium at around 60%. But if it is, as Trump has constantly said, buried under, these rubbled, former enrichment facilities, and given the fact that Iran doesn't have any other components really working of their nuclear program, yes, eventually we should secure that, but it's not an immediate problem. I mean, it's like if they manage to miraculously get it, how are they going to enrich it? And if
it's important to know. It's important to note, not that I think we should act as if. We should act as if they have it. We only know they have it because they told us 5 days before the war started, when they went to the negotiation before the war started, and they went, yeah, we have 800 pounds or 900 pounds of material. You think we don't, but we do. Ha, 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 ha. Which was a sort of interesting tactic to get us to forestall our fight in the war, since our whole purpose was, we're saying you can't get a nuclear weapon. They're like, well, we have enough for a nuclear weapon. It's like, okay, good. We're about to start bombing you then. Like Saddam said, if you said, I don't have it, why are you bothering me? And we said, we don't believe you. Here, they said, we have it. And we're like, okay, we believe you. You have it. We're going to, you have now just eliminated any reason for us to forestall our military adventure here. Abe, you want to?
I just want to weigh in, just jump back to the Israeli poll story. I think part of what that's about, big part of what that's about, is about this recent narrative being crafted that all of this is the fault of Bibi the lone madman on a crusade who doesn't even have the support of the Israelis in this. I think that's the narrative that we see the legacy media and good many others trying to put in place. So if they can get some semblance of a poll together that if you squint and you ignore the fact that it's out of date. By the way, something about Trump's actions here is he sort of renders everything out of date, all coverage immediately, because he switches it up by the hour. That they can further push this idea that Bibi and Bibi alone caused this war, caused the rupture between American public opinion and Israel, and sacrificed the American-Israeli relationship and all that.
Seth?
I think, isn't the idea that the Iranians dropped mines that they can't find, isn't that proof that this needs to be fixed in a holistic way before moving on? I mean, in all seriousness, if this is a splintered government, and it's now just the IRGC running around dropping mines, but without the naval capacity, right? The IRGC isn't the Navy; they're the speedboats, like Eli was saying. Theoretically, the IRGC is one thing, the Navy is the other, and I don't know how much they talk to each other. But especially now in that situation, if they're just going to go around dropping mines, but they don't have a coordinated state apparatus to follow up on that and mark them and know where to get them and all that stuff that you would normally go through with a functioning government and a functioning relationship between whoever's dropping the mines and the Navy and all that stuff, you can't possibly be left in this position. You can't possibly be left in a position of, I sometimes drop mines in the Strait of Hormuz and I have no idea where they are. Like my kid, we do this with my kids in their shoes. And it's like, well, the shoe is wherever you took your shoe off, They have no idea. This is like, okay, so somebody has to be in charge of the shoes here. And it's not the 3-year-old, right? Because he's going to lose the shoes under the couch or whatever. This is, Iran absolutely cannot be another argument that Trump is right to want to see this addressed, but also that all aspects of the strait and its protection have to be fixed, including, monitoring Iranian access to it.
That's a very good point, and it's also, yes, that if the Iranians are going to leave a mess behind in the Strait of Hormuz, somebody's got to clean it up, and they clearly don't even have the capacity to clean it up. So one way or another, this is going to happen simply as a matter of international economic hygiene, so that some tanker doesn't hit a stray mine that's been left there, floating in the water, and then creates a gigantic environmental catastrophe with millions of barrels on fire. Eli,
can I just add one other thing to just make us on my optimism riff? What has been the Iranian message and spin since the negotiations broke down? It has not been, death to America, we're building a nuke, prepare to die. It hasn't been, we're going to go and take out, all these vessels and, you better watch it, buddy. It's been, we were so close. And then at the very last minute, they make these unreasonable demands. I think it's Israel. I mean, that's what they're saying. That's what Ghalibaf and all these other people are saying. Their message is, we were really being accommodating for 20 hours. And in the 21st hour, Trump got on the phone and made it impossible to reach anything. And so that also tells me that they don't really have much leverage yet. They love to make threats. They're not their position has been, we were the reasonable ones. We wanted to make a deal. And then you guys came in with this no enrichment demand and we can't do it. But that tells me that there's pressure from China behind the scenes or something, because the Chinese don't like unaccounted mines in the Strait of Hormuz. That's very bad for them. That's very bad for the fact, because they rely on it at this point. This is really this has the potential to nuke China's economy more than anyone else.
Trump has issued, as we have been speaking, a truth on the very subject that we're talking about right now, which reads as follows. Iran's navy is laying at the bottom of the sea, completely obliterated, 158 ships. What we have not hit are their small number of what they call fast attack ships, because we did not consider them much of a threat. Warning, if any of those ships come anywhere close to our blockade, they will be immediately eliminated, capital letters, using the same system of kill that we use against the drug dealers on boats at sea. It is quick and brutal. P.S. 98.2% of drugs coming into the U.S. by ocean or sea have stopped. Thank you for this attention. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President DJT. So
President Crockett and Tubbs.
There you go. Okay. So I don't think that like resolves or should hearten or make Christine feel as though, we're now all safe from the attack boats. But at least what it does say is that they're on the radar of this mission, and that it is understood that they represent maybe the only serious existing threat, exactly as you describe it, and that there will be a strategy to counter it. So how we define victory, this is actually, I literally just finished editing a piece by John Shanzer that will be in our May issue on the very subject of how do you define victory in a world in which you have antagonists who will never concede defeat. Jihadists won't concede defeat. Hezbollah won't concede defeat. Hamas doesn't concede defeat. The Iraqis didn't concede defeat. All of that, the Iranians will never concede defeat. So can you defeat somebody who doesn't concede defeat? I think the answer logically is, of course, yes, you can. That defeat doesn't require somebody saying uncle. It requires whoever the person is who should say uncle losing all their capability to be a threat. That is defeat. There's a lot of people in the world who are not going to want to grant Donald Trump or Bibi Netanyahu the credit for having achieved that if there is no piece of paper that says, yes, I am Robert E. Lee and I concede that we've lost the war, or I'm Emperor Hirohito I'm on the USS Missouri surrendering to the United States. That doesn't happen. Can you win? A lot of people are going to want to say, no, you can't win, and that they didn't win, and that the Iranians are still standing, so they're stronger than they were before, which again is a kind of Obi-Wan Kenobi theory of fighting, where they kill you, but you're stronger dead than you were alive.
It's also a logical. It's a logical obscenity. I mean, because it would mean that every power or force that decides that it will never admit defeat will always win. I mean, that's just ridiculous. You don't need a nuke. You don't need the ability to choke off the straits. You just say, we will never say we lost, and therefore that means we have never lost.
Iran turned the tide of this war, if you want to say it did, which I don't think it did, but by saying we are threatening the Strait of Hormuz. So Trump has now called their bluff and said, oh yeah, we're threatening the Strait of Hormuz. We're threatening your Strait of Hormuz. You want $2 billion for every ship to come in? They're not coming in. You want to send your boats out? Your boats are not going out. How do you like them apples? So as Trump would say, what card? What card do they have to play? The only card they can play is starting a shooting war with us in the strait. I mean, what else do they? I'm just logically trying to think this through.
Well,
where are they now?
Let's broaden the aperture just slightly, which is that Tom Friedman said it best, right? He said Iran's terrible and it's good. They should be defanged, and he gets it in that sense. But on the other hand, Trump and Netanyahu are criminal threats to our democracies, and they can't have a win. And Tom Friedman, or if Tom Friedman readers are listening to this podcast, I have a message for you. If Iran loses and you accept the reality that this threat of an Iranian nuke, which has bedeviled American presidents for a quarter century, has now been pretty much dealt with. Maybe they will be suicidal and they'll try to build again. We'll have to bomb it again. But at this point, it is really taken care of in a way, and that's good for the world. Don't worry about it. it's not going to mean that Republicans are going to win the midterm. The history of these things is that the glory is fleeting. Look at George H.W. Bush after winning the Gulf War, or Winston Churchill after winning World War II. They then went on to lose elections. So this is a fake choice. You don't have to think of it existentially. And you can still think that Trump is a terrible threat to the Constitution and everything like that, and recognize that this war was necessary and successful. It's not that hard, so I think they're getting themselves in the knots for no good reason. And my hope actually would be that this school of foreign policy thought that says that you have to get the Iranians to agree not to, give me a break. We took it away from them. And at this point, the JCPOA logic, the Obamans, I believe this war, among other things, is discrediting that entire approach. And that's okay. You can still probably have your political victory at some point. It just means that you cannot say that everything that Trump does is terrible and, move on.
So let's talk about a Trump political defeat, because we should maybe get to this as well, right? Viktor Orban lost yesterday in Hungary after his 16-year rule, and he didn't just lose. I mean, he was wiped. His party was wiped out. The Fidesz party, the opposition, is now has a supermajority. It won, basically now has 2/3 of the parliament. And of course, Vance was sent over to try to help. And every time it appears Trump now tries to involve himself in local elections here or abroad, the results are very ambiguous at best. Maybe he can affect Republican primaries. It's like, I don't know, if you're a candidate running for office this midterm, whether it's going to be a good idea or a bad idea to have Trump come in and try to help you is very, very unclear. So I do want to point out that one thing in Eli's estimation about where this goes is, we were told that Orban had essentially become Putin, that he had choked off all opposition routes, that he was an autocrat who had created conditions under which he had changed the fundamental nature of Hungary's government and civil society so that he could not lose. And then he turns around. He doesn't only lose, he loses an election that has essentially discredited him almost forever. Christine, what do you make of this?
Well, I think the message about Orban's defeat lands differently in the United States, and particularly in the media, than what actually led to his defeat by his own countrymen. And that was the message of corruption that the opposition was hammering over and over again. It was, and they could see the results of 16 years of Orban. He didn't increase the birth rate. The economy wasn't improving. All of the things he had promised with his revolutionary approach to governance didn't pan out. And I think that with the absolutely relentless message of corruption is what was his undoing. The guy who won is very, very conservative. He's not he's not the kind of liberal that liberals in our country would love to embrace. So I think that should be a bit of a warning to any populist movements, but particularly to MAGA, which has made a lot of promises about bringing back manufacturing jobs, about the kind of family-based policies that Orban championed, and that had this intellectual, very small but influential intellectual class of Americans who would travel back and forth and praise Orban's grand experiment. So, it should be a little bit of a humbling reminder to them that results still matter, and corruption remains a very powerful tool that I'm quite sure the Democrats will be using in the midterms. But I think looking ahead to 2028, whoever wants to get themselves on the Republican ticket, they're going to have to answer to some of the issues of corruption that I'm sure we're going to see brought to the fore, particularly if there's a Democratic Congress.
I just want to point out that the rhetoric of the people with whom I think largely agree about the importance of democracy and all that, but the rhetoric that has overtaken liberal defenders of democracy over the last 10 years involving Trump and his, he's going to suspend the election. He's going to look for a third term. He didn't concede the election in 2020, which he didn't, and that was shameful and terrible, and he should have been impeached for it a second. He should have been convicted for it, in my view, after January 6th. Nonetheless, what they lay out is he's Hitler. He's Hitler. This is the Reichstag. We're in 1933. I don't know who Hindenburg is in this formula, but according to Bob Kagan, it's already 1934 or something like that. And the Orban result just proves how preposterous this argument is. Even a country that's only been a democracy for 35 years since the collapse of the Cold War, in Hungary, where, granted, Orban took all kinds of steps to centralize control and power in his own hands for his own political and ideological purposes, is nonetheless capable of being, kicked to the curb. And Republicans are clearly going to get kicked to the curb in 2026. Cook Political Report is now getting very close to saying that the Democrats are going to take the Senate. Eliana, right? That's the latest, is like North Carolina shifted toward the Democrats. Various places that look like they were toss-ups, maybe Alaska. There is a map of North Carolina. There is a map that looks like Democrats will not only win the House commandingly, but will take the Senate, which will, by the way, effectively end the Trump administration's ability to maneuver freely. So autocracy. This is one lousy autocracy that's being set up here.
Yeah, well, I've long been of the view that, sure, I think if President Trump had his druthers, he'd be an autocrat. He'd love to rule by fiat, but we have a system that constrains him, and I actually think January 6th demonstrated that in many ways. And you're right. The midterms, I think, are going to be incredibly tough for Republicans. I am skeptical Democrats will take the Senate. You're right. North Carolina is competitive. Republicans and Trump himself, when Laura Trump decided not to run in North Carolina, Republicans cleared the field for Michael Whatley, the former RNC chairman, who's a weak candidate. And Chuck Schumer has done a pretty good job recruiting candidates. But up in Maine, and we don't have much time left, but we can have a longer discussion about this stuff. It does look like Graham Plattner is going to defeat Janet Mills, the sitting governor. And I think that's actually going to hurt Democrats. I've said not to underestimate Plattner, who I think is quite talented. But I think Plattner will be a weak general election candidate in Maine against Susan Collins. So there are some bright spots for Republicans. So I don't think Democrats will end up taking the Senate, though I'm not counting them totally out. But if I had to place my bets now, I don't think they're going to take the Senate for some reasons like that.
But most importantly, here in the United States,
yes, Trump is not a dictator.
That is Nazi Germany. The House of Representatives is going Democratic. So bully for Bob Kagan and the Atlantic and everybody who told us that Orban was the new Putin and that Trump is the new Hitler, because they're looking foolish, short-sighted, hysterical, and frankly pompous and kind of creepy.
One other thing about Orban, and I'm far from an expert on Hungary and Hungarian elections, but it's my understanding that it's actually changes Orban implemented in Hungary's voting system that hurt him. And Orban has conceded defeat. Okay, he's not even January 6th-ing the elections. He's conceded. Also an interesting fact.
Yeah. The note, I think you're right about the hyperbole. Certainly the comparisons to Hitler, which we've been hearing since 2015 about Donald Trump. Yeah. I mean, those have worn out any sort of tolerance for comparison. I think what has always been missing in the opposition to Trump is a thoughtful and critical view of the ways in which, as president, he has stress tested our institutions in a way no other president has. I mean, there's a recent story about him trying to change what kinds of documents the archives can store from his administration in a kind of bid to make sure that stuff doesn't get archived so future historians can't actually write history. That kind of stuff, of course, enrages me. But is those kinds of tests of the institutions, most of which have been stopped by the courts so far, some of which is Congress for example, senators saying, if you bring this nominee forward, we won't, just forget about it. So a lot of it's behind the scenes, but we shouldn't underestimate. I think if you're a conservative, you should care deeply about how he has constantly tried to sort of flex a little autocratic muscle, and in most cases has been pushed back, showing that our institutions are strong. But that itself, that process, can nevertheless degrade a country's sort of moral bearings in terms of what is the role of the executive. And so those sorts of things, I think that's the tone that I think has always been missing from the opposition, unfortunately, because we need a healthy opposition in a country anytime, particularly when one party is controlling 2 of 3 branches of government.
Seth?
Yeah, I also think that and I'm not whatabouting anything here. I think that there's a lesson here in when we talk about the threat to democracy. One of the things that's being listed that Orban did to accumulate power is expand the court and then pack it, with, 4 new guys or whatever, loyal to him or something like that. So, I think that there's, one of the things that people say in response to what you're saying, that, Trump is not a dictator, this is not the right, whatever, is that, well, these things are, step by step, it's a boiling frog problem. And, if you don't see the individual steps that an authoritarian or a potential authoritarian will take, and you take them all as if they're disconnected or each one is happening in a vacuum, then you'll boil like the frog before you realize what's going on. And I think it's just an important lesson that the things that we see as power grabs in other countries, clearly, when we have that discussion in the U.S., we don't have that sense of consensus on, we're still going to have Elizabeth Warren saying, expand and pack the court. We'll hear that again. Certainly, by the way, if the midterms go really well for the Democrats, we'll probably hear it again. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but we'll hear it. But, it's one of those things where you say, it's like looking at a chess game from the outside, you're like, oh, I can see the clear move, mate in 3, if you're the one not playing. And when we look at other countries and we see these things, we go, that's authoritarianism and that's a slippery slope. And we don't necessarily take the lesson back here. We're very good at recognizing it abroad. And that really goes for everybody across the political spectrum.
I got to say that while I agree that the things are being stress tested, and I do not, and I don't take that lightly. I do think that there was this moment of transition in the second Obama term that was the glide path to where we are, that Trump didn't incept this out of nowhere. The moment was when Obama said, I have a pen and a phone, and I'm not going to expect that the things that I want are going to get through this recalcitrant legislature. So I'm just going to do them on my own and then see if the courts let me go ahead with it. And of course, then also Harry Reid blowing up the filibuster when he did, or partially blowing up the filibuster when he did. And this began a kind of period of antinomianism that Trump was the perfect person in his own emotional makeup to try to take advantage of. And fortunately, the system has, I think, had more hold to it than otherwise. But I think we were going down this road to antinomianism before, and that had Hillary won, I don't know whether she would have continued, she would have followed along, wouldn't have been as extreme as Trump's path. But Obama basically just, began a new way of looking at the presidency that was very, very damaging. And then Biden did exactly the same thing. The COVID measures were an act of extra constitutional outrage, department by department, claiming emergency powers, and then the student loan debt and stuff like that. It's not like Trump did this unilaterally or on his own. 2 Democrats and Trump all decided to play this game with our Constitution and with our institutions to our great detriment.
Can I continue in my Pangloss spirit of optimism? Here's a silver lining to Democrats winning the House in the midterms. all the worst elements of the isolationist anti-Semitic right, the Marjorie Taylor Greene and Nick Fuentes, are effectively at this point saying, vote for Democrats. Nick Fuentes is saying that explicitly. I really hope that Tucker is he's one hair away from that. I think he'll go. I hope he goes there. I don't know. But you will have the worst elements of the coalition that only a few months ago we were worried would, sweep into power when Vance, wins the nomination, that will be blamed in part for good reason for, when Democrats win the House. And in a few months, everyone on the right will be like, well, this is terrible. I wonder how that happened. And then you will have all of these ready-made scapegoats. And I am here for it. I've got my popcorn. I'm ready.
All right.
So that's a good sign.
You're ruining our brand, Eli.
Yeah,
I know.
Pangloss speaks. I got a quick recommendation and we'll go. Last night I watched the first episode on AMC of a show called The Audacity. This is the second AMC show about Silicon Valley. The first show is called Halt and Catch Fire. It's, of course, the third show about Silicon Valley because there was Silicon Valley on HBO, the Mike Judge sitcom. Both Silicon Valley and Halt and Catch Fire were satirical portraits of the rise of the Silicon Valley culture, but quite gentle in certain ways and amused and, somewhat supportive and whatever. The Audacity, which is a show about about billionaires and a company that is going through a crisis because Apple decides not to take it over. And it is a descent into hell. It is a very bright, cheery, colorful, satirical descent into hell. This is Silicon Valley as the Garden of Earthly Delights. It is dark. It is brilliantly written by a guy named Jonathan Glotzer and an old friend of mine, the novelist Arthur Phillips. It is about a shrink who does insider trading, a psychopath who has $1 billion company. Everyone is talking about Big Tim, meaning Tim Cook, and what he's up to. Zach Galifianakis as some kind of we don't even know what he does. And then two guys from the Veterans Administration who are just looking for someone to give $250 million to help them set up the Veteran Administration IT system. It was an amazing pilot, one of the best I've ever seen. You can watch it on AMC or AMC Plus. It's and as I say, as a portrait of the change in American culture's view of Silicon Valley, charted through the course of these three shows, Silicon Valley, Halt and Catch Fire, and this, it's very telling that we are now basically in the. Of course, there was also the Elizabeth Holmes show with Amanda Seyfried, but that was, of course, a true crime story, really. Anyway, it's a very interesting chart because we have gone from, American optimism about American, what would you call American innovation, to we are descending and these people are dragging us to hell. So I'm going to be very interested to see how it goes. Anyway, Eli Lake, thank you very much for joining with us. We'll be back tomorrow for Christine, Abe, Seth, and Eliana. I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.